G'day fellas, how you going? Welcome back. This is the next video in the series of videos that I'm making about how to enter a cosplay competition and get the best results possible from it. Okay? Now, in the first video, we talked about, should you even enter a cosplay competition that's upcoming? So maybe you've already decided, yes, I should enter this competition. It's suitable for me, but in this video, I'm going to be talking about 3 really big things that you need to think about before you enter the competition. Okay? Let's go. Okay, 3 big things to consider before you even put the application form in to enter a competition, okay? You might get really excited and say, oh yes, good competition, good experience points, or good prizes to win. But the first thing you need to ask yourself is, number 1, how much time do you actually have to dedicate to the competition, okay? Now, the competition itself, for example, might be about 6 months in the future, okay? You might think to yourself, 6 months, plenty of time to make a costume. But in your own personal life, how many months do you actually have? Now, when I say this, you might have things in your life like work commitments, you might have school commitments, you might have an overseas trip that's coming up, you might have another event in your life that might be taking up some of that time. And so you need to really consider how many months or how much time do I actually have to dedicate to this project. As you might know, costume making takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of things that can get in the way, and sometimes it usually takes a lot longer than you think to actually make your costume, and you really need to allocate time aside to work on the costume and also factor in all of these different elements that would contribute to making the costume. Okay, so it might not just be time making the costume. It could also be things like sourcing the materials, planning out a skit performance, making time to practice those things. Maybe you need a certain part of the costume made with the help of somebody else. You need to factor in time for meeting up with those people and also making those things, the travel time. There's a lot of different things to consider, okay? So 6 months before a competition might not be 6 months. There's a lot of different things you have to factor in. Make sure you factor in those elements before you make the decision to proceed with the competition. Okay, and the second big thing you need to consider is the cost, okay? Now, you might have made costumes in the past, maybe you haven't, but when you make your own costume, especially if it's a really big, fancy project for the purpose of a competition, you really need to factor in how much is it actually going to cost you. Okay, now it doesn't matter if it's, if it's something that's a pure sewing project, maybe it's an armor project, maybe it's a combination of both. It can get very expensive, okay? Now, especially if it's with materials that you've never worked with before, or it's a new kind of skill that you're going to be doing, you probably have no idea how much it's going to cost you, okay? When you've used certain materials before, or you've done a certain technique in the past, over time you'll start to get an idea of how much of the material you're actually going to need and how much it's going to cost you. But if you have no idea because it's a new technique, it's something you really have to factor in because it can get very expensive. The cheapest costume I've made in the past has cost me $50. The most expensive has been almost $1,000, okay? And that was with using materials I've never used before, okay? So make sure that, it's something that is going to be, yeah, I've got enough funds put aside to make a project. It's a nice hobby, and it's not something in which, you're unsure if you're going to have a job next week, or you're not sure if you're going to be able to pay rent next week. Make sure that entering the competition is going to be a financially viable thing to do, because cosplay can get very expensive. And the third big thing to consider before you enter a cosplay competition is, what is your support network like? Okay, this might be a very interesting question to consider because you might think, oh, I'm doing this competition for me. I'm doing this for myself. I'm not doing it for anybody else. When you start doing competitions, you might have already experienced it before. It can get very stressful, it can get very lonely, it can get very isolating because you can get very trapped in your own head. You don't know who's going to be there to support you, you don't know what people are going to think about you, your thoughts can run rampant, okay? A very, very important thing that you could have in your life, or just seem to consider for the purpose of this competition, is who will be there to support you if you do need an ear to listen to or a shoulder to lean on. Okay? Because I think anybody who's entered a competition before can tell you it is stressful. it is definitely stressful because you've got a time limit to work within. Maybe you've put some expectation upon yourself, whatever it might be. You might just need those people around you. And without that, it can get very lonely, it can get very isolating, and in the end, it might not be a very pleasant experience. Okay? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean everybody around you, your family, your friends need to be patting you on the back and cheering you on. It doesn't necessarily need to be like that, but at the very least, whoever you speak to the most, whether it might be a close friend, maybe it's your family, just be sure that, you know, the people close to you have got your back, because it really can mean a world of difference when it gets to the final stages of the competition, to have those people who are important to you to have your back. Alright, so those are the 3 big things that you need to ask yourself before you enter a competition. Do you have enough time? Do you have enough money? And do you have a healthy support network? Okay? Now, in the very next video, we're going to be talking about how to pick a cosplay partner. This may or may not be viable for the competition you're entering, but if it is a performance-based competition, typically partners are very common in those kind of competitions, okay? So if that's something you're wondering about what makes for a good partner, check out the next video, which you can watch right here.